Major shout out to Gege not only for giving us so many banger chapters in a row at this point, but also for not taking a break again this week, which gives us 4 consecutive chapters now. That's pretty much unheard of for us over in One Piece land, so for Gege to do this in the middle of the biggest fight in his series is pretty awesome for the fans, I gotta say. And I did miss last week's review, so I'll kind of touch on that here and there, but I want to start with this discussion that we heard with the other sorcerers during the very beginning of chapter 234, because I think a lot of us were already wondering when one of them might get the itch to jump into battle now that Sukuna's kind of stacked the deck with both Mahoraga and Agito by his side, especially Kashimo, whose whole goal is basically taking down Sukuna, and I talked about that a lot in my last JJK video, and I'm really happy that Gege kind of touched on that by showing us their whole conversation. So now we know where each of the sorcerers kind of stand on the matter, and I think it's really interesting how some of them had very different takes from one another. Like Okotsu was obviously very ready to jump into battle, and Yuji even backed him up on that, but Maki thought that if anyone was going to go, it would have to be her, since Okotsu is basically an insurance policy. And then some of the others thought that waiting it out is the strategic call, but my favorite take of all of them has to be Kashimo's, who simply says that this is Gojo's battle, and it wouldn't be right for anyone to interfere. And the reason I love this so much is that it's coming from Kashimo in particular. This is someone who I and many others have been waiting to do or say anything about what's happening, since their entire goal is defeating Sukuna with their one-use curse technique. So seeing Kashimo have that kind of respect for their battle, even when Sukuna has been vulnerable at times, is pretty awesome. And since Kashimo said, "Are all modern sorcerers this dense?" it leaves us to assume that that was probably a common take back however many centuries ago. I mean, I was already dying for another flashback to the Heian era, or really any other past era that some of the Culling game sorcerers are from, and this only fuels that because for some reason I doubt Sukuna would ever abide by those rules. He doesn't really strike me as someone to abide by any type of code of honor that isn't a binding vow or something he has to listen to. But then we also get to see Gojo go at it with the other two Shikigami, and this might be one of the coolest parts of the entire fight whenever it hits the anime in a few years. I mean, it was just a few panels, but seeing Gojo kind of split the double team, land a black flash on Agito, then spin him around by his tail like it's the end of Mario 64, and then even rip the tail clean off, dodge Mahoraga, do this kind of spin kick thing, and then punch Agito is an amazing sequence choreography-wise. And like a lot of fights in manga in general, it's kind of hard to capture just how dope the choreography is until it's animated. So whenever I read this, this really struck me as something that I know is going to be really cool whenever it hits the anime. Especially because Agito wasn't around too long, it was like one total chapter, as we'll talk about here in a minute. So I'm sure they're going to give him some love when he does hit the anime, since he's there for a pretty short amount of time. And his design is pretty damn awesome, I gotta say. I really hope that in the future, Sukuna or maybe even Megumi makes more of these Chimera type things, or they're mix and matching more of these Shikigami. But then we get into this next part of the fight, which is a really interesting development, because first we see Sukuna's kind of lurking in the shadows, thinking about how the fight's going pretty well, and he just needs to stop Gojo from firing off purple, which, as we saw at the end of last chapter, is exactly what Gojo's plan is. But then we also hear Sukuna asking Mahoraga how long it expects him to wait, and that it's not Megumi's shadow anymore, but his. And immediately after this, the Dharma Chakra wheel spins, and then Mahoraga cuts Gojo's arm clean off by using Cleave and Dismantle, which even left a massive gash in the buildings behind them, which was pretty cool. This is really interesting because we already know Sukuna can swap between his own abilities and Megumi's, or whatever body he's taken over, but now it's almost like he's combining them together. Like Mahoraga is adapting offensively almost, even to the person whose shadow it belongs to. Even the other sorcerers are kind of shocked, which really isn't anything new during this fight if I'm being honest, but it does let us know that this is definitely some kind of crazy turn of events. And this led me down a few different trains of thought about how this could work. And the first one is that, as I've said in I think all my JJK videos at this point, nobody has ever successfully controlled Mahoraga. So when Sukuna was saying all that stuff about how long will you make me wait, it's my shadow, not Megumi's, I thought he was going to lead that into a discussion about how Mahoraga isn't being fully controlled yet. Like he's almost on the verge of controlling it and he's asking how long it's going to take. But instead, we saw this new ability that Mahoraga is getting, which is extremely interesting. So I don't know if this could maybe be the first step to Sukuna successfully controlling him, like Mahoraga is almost allowing Sukuna to help him out or something like that. Or maybe this is tied to something else, which is how Gojo once said Yuji's body would adapt to Sukuna's curse technique. Does that phenomenon maybe work the exact same way for Shadows and the 10 Shadows technique? Like maybe the user's curse technique kind of wears off on the Shikigami? Because usually the user just has the 10 shadows technique, right? Which the Shikigami are a part of. But now we have someone with another curse technique also being able to utilize them. So is it maybe kind of wearing off in the same way that Gojo was talking about Sukuna and Yuji? Or maybe it only works for the Mahoraga since Mahoraga specializes in adaptation to begin with. I mean, it would kind of make sense because Sukuna was inside Yuji's body and now he's inside Megumi's body. So the most important common denominator is kind of already there. And having Mahoraga involved at all only makes adapting to things that much easier in general. I bet that if Yuji ever does get Sukuna's curse technique, I bet you will get a callback panel to this moment right here with Gojo where instead of Gojo losing an arm, it'll be Sukuna losing an arm to Yuji's attack. Because we all know that somehow, some way, Gege is gonna let us see that form for Sukuna. And whenever that happens, he's gonna be a menace. Not sure what that means for Gojo at that point, because I mean, Gojo might have the last finger, which is a pretty popular theory. Pretty sure Sukuna even said it himself, but either way, the true form for Sukuna has been set up for way too long not to happen. And I think Yuji using his own technique against him when that happens to maybe slice off one of the 4 arms or multiple of them would be pretty insane. But after Gojo loses his arm, he kind of slides down the building and keeps getting attacked by Sukuna and the 2 Shikigami. Until Gojo looks at Agito and says, you know, I've been thinking you just don't fit in with this crowd, and then fires off a maximum output blue from basically point blank range, which seems to completely obliterate the Shikigami, leaving only Sukuna and Mahoraga. And we also see Gojo's healing his arm up with reverse curse technique. Now I love how the narrator hypes this all up by saying in 41 seconds, Gojo's purple will again leave its mark on the battlefield of Shinjuku. So I don't think this fight's gonna last too much longer. I mean, it's been going on for quite a while already, but there's still 41 seconds until that happens, and in manga time, that's almost an eternity. So I'm sure Sukuna's gonna do a few more underhanded things before we even get there. I bet next chapter will end with Gojo ready to fire off purple, and then we'll just see all the aftermath in 235. So I'm expecting next chapter to kind of start off with some discussion about exactly what the hell just happened with Mahoraga, just so us readers can kind of get up to speed, because I'm not even sure if Gojo knows exactly what just happened, so we're gonna have to wait to see about that. And maybe this could all be kind of like an inversion of what we saw when Gojo fought Toji, because remember, purple was a secret technique that very few people knew about, and that was a big factor in how it took down Toji. He was ready for blue and red, but not purple. But maybe Gege's kind of flipping that on its head here, and there's a secret layer to the 10 shadows technique that Sukuna somehow knows about, but not many other people. Not sure if this is because of him being in Megumi's body, so he has access to the memories or whatever, or maybe there's just something else going on with his past from the Heian era. I have seen some theories floating around recently that Sukuna could be tied to the Zenin clan somehow, like more directly than being in Megumi's body, and while I think a direct familial relation of any kind would be way too on the nose, it could be interesting if it ties more into the Shikigami themselves than the family or even the curse technique exactly. Because while Sukuna was a human a long time ago, his fingers were incarnated into cursed objects, which obviously are then eaten by different vessels to reincarnate into. And while Shikigami are very different from reincarnation in this aspect, there are also a lot of similarities. Like Shikigami are incarnated by using their summoner's cursed energy and an intermediary, like a talisman. And Sukuna and the other sorcerers from the past few centuries are also reincarnated using an intermediary, which are the cursed objects in this case, almost acting in place of the talisman that Shikigami use. But instead of needing the summoner's cursed energy directly, they reincarnate into someone else's body that acts as a vessel, or sometimes a cage. And I think this is interesting because we don't really know how cursed objects are made, and that's why Kenjaku has been so important, and the fact he's a major antagonist in general right now, but throughout history that's why he was so important. He made binding vows with hundreds of sorcerers over the last 1,000 years to transform their remains into cursed objects, and that's how they reincarnate into different people today. Gege has kinda kept that whole process a secret up to this point, and with Kenjaku lurking in the background this whole time, I wonder if there is a connection here between how Shikigami are made and how cursed objects can reincarnate into people. Either way though, I can't wait to see what Gege's cooking up next week, and if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to hit like and subscribe, and until next time, later.